Welcome to the Insight podcast. My guest on the show today is Dr. Kiran Sodha. Kiran is a GP and lifestyle medicine physician. He's also the founder of Mahi Health, a resource helping people overcome pre-diabetes and type 2 diabetes. I talked to him about the number of people living with type 2 diabetes in the UK, how lifestyle, our environment, schools, family, and more are all contributing to the rise in the condition. Why we need to revolutionise the way we approach medicine. Some complicated conversations around weight and BMI. A few controversies involving some well-known influencers, and much more. Before we start, a quick favour to ask of you. Please hit the follow button wherever you're tuning into this episode. And if you've been listening to the show for a while, I'd really appreciate it if you rated the show too. This will help more listeners discover the podcast and the insights from all of my amazing guests. Now for my conversation with Dr. Kiran Sodha. Enjoy. Right, what is the current state of affairs then when it comes to type 2 diabetes in the UK?
Well, perhaps we could just start with the numbers. I think that's a good place to start. People contextualize that. Well, they're big numbers. So 5.6 million people are currently estimated to have type 2 diabetes. And roughly around 1 to 1.2 million people apparently don't know they have type 2 diabetes. So that's a huge number. That's around 20 to 25% of people who have type 2 diabetes in this country don't even know they've got it. And then when we think about pre-diabetes, which is this bit between what we class as completely not diabetic and normal compared to type 2 diabetes, there's this like little bit in the middle. If we add that in, then roughly we're talking around 11 million people in the UK. Now, that is huge. That of all the population in the UK, that's 1 in 6. But there's a paper in one of the GP journals which suggests that it's 1 in 3 of the entire adult population in the UK. So it's huge.
So that is the state of play. And is it on the rise? Is it continuing to rise?
In short, yes. Of course, we can't fully predict the future, but some of the data out there suggests that there's going to be roughly 9 people living with type 2 diabetes by 2040 in the UK. So with diabetes, but when we look at statistics, it generally follows a close 8 to 10% of that is type 1. And when I'm talking, what we're going to talk about, I guess mostly is type 2, which is 90% of all diabetes in the UK.
And there are various factors, I believe, involved in this. But what are some of the main causes? And even could we get into the implications as well of this?
This is multi-layered. So there's a number of ways in which we can think about the causes. So someone might say, well, it's because people are living unhealthy lifestyles. That could be a potential cause. And if we look into the detail of that, then we could look at it's the nutrition that it's what people are eating, it's their exercise and their movement. It's also sleep and their stress, which often gets neglected. So there's all of those factors. But that's one layer. And then we've got to think, well, what's driving that layer? So what's driving them to eat in a certain way, or what's driving them to move in a certain way? And I like to think of that as the environment and then the internal aspects. So what's going on within, what's driving us within, and what are our behaviors, what are our thought patterns, what's our mindset, what's our belief around our health? And then, of course, the environment that we're set up in, to the food that we can access in supermarkets, the way in which we can get food, the way in which we're forced to move or not move. In many cases, it looks like you're standing there, by the way. I'm definitely sitting right now. So you're moving a little bit more than me. So these sort of things, these environmental things are really, really important. And then as part of that, then we've got to think about the cultural context. Is it normal to go to work, like walking, or cycling or driving? I'll give you a really good example. In London, it's the norm to get on a bus, to get on the tube. and to walk or cycle. Today, I'm not in London, I'm in the Midlands. And actually, people think you're weird if you walk to the gym. They're like, doesn't make any sense. Why would you spend 15 minutes walking to the gym when you could be there in 3? Like, doesn't make any sense to people. So you don't see people on the street. You might do in the morning, people might be walking their dogs or the evenings, but no one's just going for a walk to go somewhere. And I think that's really fascinating. So the environment and cultural context are really key. But then you've got to go even deeper. So what's the causes of all of that? And then, of course, the society. But thinking about health determinants, then you're looking into like public health and the social side of it, but then also wealth. And wealth is a big reason or potential risk in terms of how much wealth people have and the potential impact on their health in the future. So we often think about health as wealth. Yes, absolutely. But also wealth is health. When we look at the determinants of health from the wealth that you had as a child and also the wealth that you have as an adult. And what's really, really fascinating is when we look at the economics of health and well-being, up until the 2000s, your family was a greater predictor of your future health and well-being and happiness compared to your school. But something's changed. Maybe it's the time that we're spending in school, but since the 2010s, that has flipped. So even more so than our family is your school. So that is dictating people's happiness, and that's the happiness and their well-being is then dictating their physical health too.
Interesting.
So where do we go for the cause of this? And then we can go even further and say, what happened to your parents? Because one of the biggest predictors of health and well-being in the future is what happened to your mother, more specifically your mother than your father. And it could be because of what development stages as children. Often we're more dependent up until the age of 6 or 7 with our mother, and then father often takes more of a role as you sort of go out into the world. Father has more of a role there, but it's the first 7 years where often mother, for most people, will have the most contact with their child and bonding as well.
Oof, man. There was meta.
There's a lot there,
yeah, meta on meta on meta. It's like we're in Inception, man.
And then what happened to your grandparents? Like it is really how far do you want to go back?
Yeah. I mean, I can remember first finding out about the gut microbiome and how that was passed on by your mother, and like the way in which you came into this world, and being breastfed or not, and then the things that you were exposed to as a child and how that all influenced this. And then, of course, linking to our conversation around type 2 diabetes and food and how we'd react to different food and all this kind of stuff. It just seems so much more complicated than we all went through that, I think, kind of that health kick and those messages growing up, which was calories in, calories out. Well, if you need to lose weight, you just need to exercise more and you just need to eat less. And it's like, it feels like now the conversation has turned around and we're saying, this is a much more complicated issue than that. It's not as simple as, and you're doing people a disservice by just giving that message to them. Going back to what you said about environment, it just seems to be huge. Like we are all constantly battling with adverts popping up. The amount of emails, I'm out to turn them off from Uber Eats, because you use Uber Eats once and then every week I'm saying, you'll get order again, you get a discount, order again. I'm like, man, I could be eating like a takeaway every single night and it would be 10% off. And it's like, no, I need to, this isn't okay. And then, going to the petrol station, just filling up, you're walking past a line of sweets, chocolate, biscuits, crisps, all these things. It feels like the environment is just working against us all the time. But I'm trying to think what's
really interesting.
Yeah, sorry. I'm just thinking what's the empowering message behind that? Because that's what we want, isn't it? Like how does this affect people? I think it's just awareness, like not beating people. Shouldn't beat themselves up as much as they do, because it's like you're being set up to fail.
I think awareness is really key, because we live this environment without knowing what's happening to us, and sometimes the magic of the marketing is insidious, so you don't even know it's happening to you, and they want that to be the case, because obviously that will then drive your behaviors without you necessarily realizing what you're doing, because we know that things are unhealthy, but still you might be doing something like choosing the Uber Eats and then associating sounds, smells, visually, all these things with then that product. And it's continuously at the forefront of your mind. They want your attention. We're in the game of attention, aren't we? And so if people have your attention, you're more likely to buy their products. But I thought it was really interesting around the Uber Eats because I had a thought this afternoon. I was just grabbing some lunch, and the thought was Deliveroo and Uber Eats and other apps that you can order food, they must do adverts on social media. I don't know what the law is or if there's legalities around it, but I hadn't seen an advert now for about 4 weeks that I can remember for any of these. And it's probably because of the environment that I'm living in and the things that I'm looking at and reading and watching that isn't coming up with these adverts. And I thought that was really interesting. But I'm assuming because you used Uber Eats maybe in the last 4 weeks, have you seen adverts on social media and other places?
Oh, I feel like, if I scroll through Instagram,
well, I'm going to get tons now, aren't I?
Oh, you probably are. Yeah,
I'm going to get loads.
I mean, I feel like I just talk about something on WhatsApp and then it comes out as an advert.
It does.
I feel like actually
there was the Apple case.
Oh, right, okay. What's that?
There was the Apple phone case, wasn't there? We're all going to be due 75 quid or something because Apple confirmed that they basically listen to everything that we do.
Man, a scary time.
So even when it's not
like Siri or whatever.
So,
right. Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's just listening. So and then it sold that data. So that's when it got in trouble.
It's interesting because I talked to Tamandra Harkness, who's kind of like in this world of data and AI and phones listening to us.
I need to make sure someone should fact check me. I'm willing to be fact checked on that, but that's what
listeners, let us know. But she was like, no, that's not a thing. Like it's an urban myth. They don't actually listen, but they do other like nefarious things. They do other dodgy things. But I'm like, they have to be listening because I'm just talking to my friend about, I don't know, mattresses or pillows or whatever. And then you get these adverts popping up. Anyway, with this might be a bit 100%. This might be a bit of a tangent. But it's all interesting. And the fact that you and others out there are going to the deeper reasons behind this. It's so, when I think about my kind of emotional eating, it gets to the weekend and I just start eating crap and I can beat myself up so easily. But I'm like, there is more going on there. I'm reaching for things because I'm bored. I'm reaching for things because I've, felt a little bit of rejection or something like that. And there's just, it's such a complicated issue. I want to go back to pre-diabetes. Is this a thing is this a condition that maybe more people are living with than they realize? Is that a thing or am I making that up?
Yes, it is. Right. I don't have the stats to hand, but if we're based on what's out there in the Diabetes UK analysis, that roughly 20 to 25% of people with type 2 diabetes don't know they've got type 2 diabetes. And that 1 in 3 in the UK apparently have pre-diabetes of adults. I know 1 in 3 people is not the case. Anecdotally that is. I'm pretty sure that 1 in 3 people, having seen patient after patient coming into clinic, don't have pre-diabetes when I see them as a cohort like that. But actually, if we were to do blood tests with everyone, then perhaps the rate of pre-diabetes would be much, much higher.
Interesting.
So, sorry, I forgot the first question. Is it that do people know about pre-diabetes?
As in, are there people living with it that might not realise? Yeah. Is there more cases than perhaps?
Yeah. I think it's overstated about symptoms with diabetes. I virtually see no cases, 0, where we diagnose people with diabetes and they have symptoms. Maybe 1 or 2 with some minor changes. Maybe they've had increased infections recently, or they've had skin or thrush infections, or they've had some skin changes, or they've been feeling tired. But it's not the case. Most people are being diagnosed before they're getting symptoms.
Right. Because that's interesting because it kind of goes against what I was about to say or ask about whether, people that have kind of adjusted to a new normal of how they're feeling. So maybe kind of getting into 30s, 40s and feeling maybe a bit more lethargic, maybe putting on a little extra weight, maybe not sleeping as well, maybe feeling just a little bit more anxious, and there might be things, and that might be an indicator of something, but they've just adjusted to that and thinking, well, this is just normal. This is just part of getting older. Yeah.
Well, I think you're right.
Right.
I think there's all of that, and there is this normalization of blaming it on getting older. But is it getting older, or is it generally the body saying something's not right here? It's part of that unhealthy picture. So the question is it the sugar level in the pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes leading to the symptom, or is it your overall health? And I think that's the distinction. So when people improve their blood glucose levels, they improve their whole health. So they have more energy, they have better well-being, their mental health improves, all of that improves. What's difficult, and it's this nuance of reading more and more and more and becoming an expert. The more you read, the less you know, because you're less sure about what's causing
Dunning-Kruger, I think it's called, isn't it? The Dunning-Kruger effect.
Is Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it goes up and down. You sort of you land somewhere in the middle, don't you? Yeah. That's right. And it is that. So yes, absolutely. Some things are related to blood glucose. Some things are related to overall health. And there's a massive crossover. And I think the things around tiredness, not sleeping well, lethargy, all that is going to be a crossover. But in terms of symptoms for type 2 diabetes, if people are interested in that, I think the ones that people should be aware of are skin changes, which is often not well known. So darkening around the neck area is often very common, much more common in darker skin tones.
Interesting.
Thrush is a fairly common one that people think about. So if you're getting more frequent infections generally, it suggests the immune system's not working well, and often that can be because you're getting excess glucose. Thrush, because if you're peeing out more glucose because you've got too much of it, then that provides an environment for microbes to take hold as well in women. So that could be a potential risk. And then the tiredness, because your body's metabolically speaking, so the way in which the body processes energy and glucose is not working very well. So again, that could be a reason for symptoms. But then the other symptoms around urine as well. So if you're constantly thirsty and you're constantly passing urine, then that's often a case because the glucose in the bloodstream, the body's trying to get rid of that glucose. So it's trying to dilute it, so you're thirsty, and it's trying to get rid of it, so you're peeing, but also the thirst and the peeing is trying to get rid of the glucose with it. So that's why the body does that. But that is not a common symptom of type 2 diabetes. But for type 1 diabetes, which happens usually or more often in younger adults or in children, but it can happen in older age too, that's the one where these symptoms usually present, because people go from totally fine to really high blood glucose levels. And then, of course, they're getting all the classic symptoms of diabetes.
And pre-diabetes, did you say there's no symptoms, or it's just harder to spot? Or
I think there you won't get the classic symptoms of type 2 diabetes or diabetes generally when it's high, but you will get potentially the other symptoms: well-being, exhaustion, tiredness, depending on what I'd term as your sort of metabolic health. So that's how your body's processing energy, the whole sort of factory system of the body. How is it processing what's going in, dealing with it, and then producing health or discomfort or disease in the body? Dis-ease leading to disease.
And this is what I mean about the normalization of just the spotting some of these signs and actually not accepting this is normal and thinking, okay. So I don't know what's the advice there. Like, go and see a doctor, get these things checked out, get a blood test, I don't know.
Totally. I mean, I think society is changing. I think there is an increasing expectation of wanting to look after our health more.
True.
And I think that's across all levels of society. People are coming in earlier, asking for a blood test. They're reading and watching things like the Zoe podcast, for example, is another podcast where very health focused. So people are starting to consume more and more information. So that's part of this in terms of awareness. But of course, if you need to know what's going on and something isn't right, and it's certainly a deviation from what you'd expect to feel, then you do need to get some more input. Doesn't necessarily mean that you need a blood test all the time, but certainly getting advice from a healthcare professional. And in the UK, if you can get an appointment with your GP because you're not feeling very well, then at least you can have that conversation with someone and then decide what the next best steps are. And often you will have a blood test. And I think that can often provide reassurance. Or if it is in the orange zone or the yellow zone of prediabetes, then there's a great opportunity for you to be able to do something about it as well.
I find they can be funny at the GP, at my anyway. I'm just like, I guess because I'm just a curious, healthy person. And so I'm just like, every so often, can I have a blood test? And they're like, no, you can't just have a blood test out of the blue.
Yeah.
I'm like, but I'm really interested. I want to know my B12 levels.
Yeah, I think there was a part of me at one point that was sort of like when people like you come in, and I'm like, why are you here? And it's because we were so trained in the medical industry that this is a sick service. It's a medical service, but it's for people who are sick. And also our training pattern goes hospital to primary care. It's not the other way around. It's not like we do primary care, so primary care GP work first and then go into hospitals. It's always the other way around. So we're used to dealing with sickness first as the most severe bits, and then coming into the well to the sick in between, with a lot of primary care sort of sits in that bit. But then you start to realize that people are trying to improve in their health. And I think this is where society is changing. But this is my belief, that the medical service should remain the sick service. And we need a health service. But the health service is different to the sick service. And actually, we do need to have a distinction. So if people are sick, they see this person. And if they are healthy, but they want to maintain their health, they see this person. And then there's the grey zone. And actually, when you look at how the industry is changing and who is doing what, if you want to treat your diabetes and go into remission and treat it with your lifestyle, you don't go and see an endocrinologist who's a specialist in diabetes, or a diabetologist. You don't go and see them, which doesn't seem to make sense because they're the ones specializing in this. But you don't go and see them because they treat the sickness of it. So they treat the sickness of it not with your lifestyle, but with what doctors are taught about, which is medicines or surgery. So if you go into the medical system, we're going to give you weight loss injections, we're going to give you other medicines, and we're going to refer you to bariatric surgery for major surgery. That is the medical sick system. But of course, all this extra, what we call chronic disease, long-term diseases like diabetes, often people term as lifestyle-related diseases. All of these ones, they can be reversed early, and the processes that are continuing type 2 diabetes to put it into what we call remission, which is essentially a reversal of sorts, can be treated with lifestyles. But the diabetologists don't know how to do this. Mm-hmm. And why should they, in a way? Because that's not what their training has been. But someone's got to come in and do it. So you've got two different types of health systems now. So you've really got a multidisciplinary health system in primary care now that's looking with dietitians, nutritionists, health coaches, social prescribers. Mm-hmm. And that's an entirely different system to the medical sick system, which is diabetes specialist nurses, who are now starting to bridge in between, but diabetes specialist nurses and bariatric surgeons and endocrinologists. And the cost difference is huge as well. Mm-hmm. So going into this service is very different to this service. And of course, the experience, the treatments, everything is different.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, really revolutionary, but it feels like this is what we need. This is what we need. You see all the stats about like just how much money the NHS could be saving with prevention rather than just treating things once they arise. Oh man, fascinating. So back to if we do go back to diabetes and the treatment / prevention of that, people listening that might be with a diagnosis, maybe suspect they might have pre-diabetes, maybe just looking at some healthy changes that they can make. What are some of the things that often these doctors are missing, or just people in general are missing about the management, the treatment, the prevention?
Well, okay.
Was that a crazy question?
No, it wasn't a crazy question. It's just like, at what point do I enter? So there's a whole spectrum there. So what we could do is say, okay, we'll park the medicines side and we'll talk about the pre-diabetes and the early type 2 diabetes. Because the more I go into this, the more people's treatment plan, I guess, or lifestyle plan is different, even on the spectrum of how long they've had diabetes for, where they are in the journey, what their blood glucose levels are, what other medicines they're taking. So I think maybe let's look at the pre-diabetes and early type 2 diabetes, because we can sort of, sorry for anyone who's pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetes, we're going to lump you into one category for this bit. So what can people do? So people know, and it's a given, that you should eat healthier and you should move more. And people are probably inundated with leaflets in the NHS or web links or free courses or group programs to do all of this. And credit to some of the group programs, it's a little bit more than that now. But I think that's the first place to start, because absolutely that's what people are going to be thinking. Well, what about nutrition? Okay. So maybe let's go deeper into the nutrition then.
Well, yeah, because what does eat healthy mean?
What does it even mean? Yeah. So the research that I've done is looking at all nutrition patterns around type 2 diabetes and then trying to find out what is the best pattern for eating. So aside from the objectiveness of that, we've got cultural context and food choices and preferences and tastes differences, which are going to impact this. So you can't just say eat X, Y, and Z, because if it doesn't fit in with your environment and your social context, you're going to eat A, B, C. So it's not going to work. So what I would say, the three core things. The first is reducing processed food. Every single diet plan that is related to diabetes, whether it's keto, whether it's low fat for some people, whether it's the popular low carb, whether it's Mediterranean approach, whatever it is, every single approach reduces processed food. So it's the one universal that we can take from this. Now, processing of food is probably, in my view, the most contentious thing online right now. I am seeing so much pulls in different ways. But even if you just look at the carnivore versus plant-based diets, it's the same thing for both of them. They've reduced processed food. And so that's why the carnivores are saying, come to us, we'll help you reverse your diabetes. And the plant-based people say, come to us, we'll help you reverse diabetes. But actually, they're both reducing processed food. So it's the one universal. So that's why it's number one. The second is Mediterranean approach. So it's not that people need to eat a Mediterranean type diet. And in the Mediterranean right now, we're having some major metabolic health issues. So it's not about the 2025 Mediterranean diet. It's about, in my view, of all the studies I've looked at Mediterranean diet, if I was to be super specific, I would call it the pre-1960 Greek Mediterranean diet. So then you can't come to me and say, well, what about the pizzas and the pastas?
You could sell that, man. I can see you writing a book on the Greek pre.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's happening. Maybe the book is happening. Okay. Anyway, but pre-1960s Greek diet. So what is that? That's basically 40% carbohydrate, around 18 to 20% protein, around 20 to 25% fat, and then around 10 to 15% fiber. Now, for anyone listening who's good at maths, they're going to know that doesn't add up to 100%, but it's roughly that.
I'd missed it, to be honest.
And then it's the good. Well, good. Are you a maths teacher as well at school?
Well, primary, so I do teach maths, and I should be able to add up to 100. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so we weren't counting it, but anyway. So yeah, there's this specific kind of macronutrient spread, and because it was unprocessed pre-1960 Greeks, you haven't got your typical supermarkets that we get in the UK like now or anywhere in the world. So automatically it's unprocessed. So then the quality of the ingredients, you've got higher levels of micronutrients. So micronutrients being vitamins, minerals. Then you've got a much higher level of fiber. And then the fat spread, the saturated fat that they were getting was from dairy, but they weren't having as much dairy as we think they might have been. Most of the dairy was from yogurt and less so milk, but most of it was yogurt. And then yogurt goes through a fermentation process. So now we're thinking about the gut microbiome and how that can potentially contribute to type 2 diabetes. So the way in which they were creating the yogurt, it wasn't being heat treated, it wasn't being removed. So they weren't centrifuging the fat away either, because you can centrifuge fat away. But they weren't doing that. But the spread of it was healthy generally. So when we think about saturated fat, the data consistently shows that saturated fat isn't great, but saturated fat isn't just saturated fat. There's different types of saturated fat. So there's more fermentation happening. So you're getting a better breakdown of your saturated fat, which is better for the gut. Then you're looking at the carbohydrates. Well, they're not getting processed breads with gums and emulsifiers and other things added to it. They're getting hard, solid bread that requires a good chew and a good breakdown, and it's also been fermented through the processes. So again, high quality. And then the rest of their foods are through vegetables. And then people can say, well, what about the meat? Well, they only had meat twice a week because it was a delicacy and it's expensive. So they were getting their proteins from other sources. And then they were also then considering having some meat as well within it. Perhaps their protein intake wasn't as high as what we're trying to achieve now. I don't know. But, if we add in beans, sort of pulses, and nuts into the mix, then you've got a great diet spread. Then if people aren't Mediterranean, it's Mediterranean approach that's culturally appropriate. So then we can say, okay, fine, there's 40% carbs, it's unprocessed, there's a good amount of fat, the saturated fat that they're getting is from fermented dairy products. Great. So let's take that into the Indian diet. We can do exactly the same. Take it to the Mexican diet. Oh my God, we can do exactly the same. So everywhere across the world, we can have this macronutrient approach. Then it depends on the journey, and some people are big fans of it. Low carb is the third option. So actually, I don't say low carb, I say lower carb. And again, it just feeds into the processed food narrative. If I was to say to you, let's cut out fats or let's cut out carbs, if you cut out carbs, the amount of processed foods that you would cut out would be huge. So then it comes down to the reducing the processed food again. And also then, because of the way carbs are often breaking down fast, we drive our eating patterns. We're sort of used to the mixture between salt, fat, and sugar. We're just consuming more of it. So you just cut out this one thing that we're consuming so much of, and suddenly we're starting to lose weight. So the lower carb thing is also, there's another benefit to the lower carb, which is contentious in the literature, but the benefit is you don't get glucose spikes as much. But the story about diabetes isn't really about glucose spikes. There's a contribution to glucose spikes. There's two parts to, we're going on to this subject now. There's two parts
and
to
I'm all for it. I want to hear
glucose.
it. Yeah, I want to hear it.
Okay, so we've got the spikes, and then we've got your baseline.
Yeah.
And diabetes has always been diagnosed based on the baseline blood test. Only in the last 15, 20 years do we use this term called A1C, this test called A1C, which is an average of your blood glucose in the last 2 to 3 months. That's how we usually diagnose diabetes. But before then, we diagnosed it either by two ways, either from how high your glucose went, essentially the glucose spike, but it was such a faff to do that. You have to drink a glucose drink and then test it 2 hours later and see what the level is. Or you check someone's fasting blood glucose. So what's their baseline blood glucose in the morning after they haven't eaten since before midnight, the day before? That was the main test that people used to use. So when we think about lower carb, we're not changing the baseline, but we're changing the spikes. Of course, if you change 3 spikes, your average then drops in theory, but that's not the underlying reason within the body for developing diabetes. So while you get quick result, so it's so nice to use lower carb because you get quick results quickly, but it doesn't treat the underlying issue, because the underlying issue is, surprise, surprise, not related to glucose or carbs, but related to fat. So it's related to fat because the more fat you have in your cells turn off the receptors, actually reduce the amount of receptors for the insulin to latch onto cells. So if you've got less receptors for insulin to latch onto cells, then you've got less channels for glucose to enter into cells. So more fat in cells equals less ability for glucose to enter. Essentially, they're saying, we're full of fat, we're full, we don't need any more, because glucose then turns into storage as fat. So it just turns off the cells. And then if you can't get it into the cells, then where does the glucose go? It stays in the bloodstream. So it just hangs around higher. So that's why it's not all about lower carb.
I think this needs repeating because
yeah, it does.
Not because of your explanation at all, but I think I'm sure you know that it needs repeating to the public so often. But of course, all of us, growing up and hearing about type 2 diabetes and understanding of our carbs, thinking that is the focus, and like how could I treat?
Oops! I just dropped my camera.
Don't worry.
Hold on a second.
I'll keep talking.
I was trying to plug it back in because the battery was dying. I was like, no, can't have that. There we go.
What was I saying?
You're saying about the importance of this understanding how type 2 diabetes and how we learnt about it.
Exactly. And also the idea that you can treat or prevent or whatever diabetes by eating a 40% or even more carbohydrate diet. A diet that is made up of 40, 50% carbohydrates, and people thinking, but hold on, I thought these were the issues. I thought this was the problem, that I was consuming too much carbohydrates. And I've heard about the low carb diet, and people seem to be getting better on that. And then, I hear about these glucose spikes. So even though I'm not diabetic, I'm going to wear one of those blood glucose monitors and watch all my spikes. I mean, that's another conversation, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well. Like all these people that suddenly are really interested in their spikes of glucose.
I have to do a lot of talking on continuous glucose monitors, and there's a lot of people have messaged me about the recent information that's on TV from Jessie and Chalsby, aka Glucose Goddess, and there's a lot of messages in my inbox in Instagram that I do need to respond to as well on that. So yeah, that's an entire topic. But people will be surprised, and I'll give a bit of a spoiler on this. I'm not absolutely fully negative about the entire thing, because there's a lot of negativity about what's coming up from Jessie and Chalsby. But there is some truth behind stuff, and there's some by proxy improvements in people's health because of the other things that they're doing, because they're focusing on glucose spikes. So by improving their glucose spikes, they're not improving their health, but it's by what they're doing instead of having the glucose spike that's actually improving their health. It's not actually related to the glucose spike. So that's where there's a lot of confusion and misinformation. So we made the glucose spike the problem, but is it necessarily the problem? Or is it the other things that you're bringing in, that you're improving to remove the unhealthy foods that are causing the glucose spike?
Right. Are glucose spikes a problem? Or are they just normal? How normal are glucose spikes?
That's the thing. The people who are anti this will say glucose spikes are normal. And the people who are very pro this are like, you shouldn't be having glucose spikes, and neither is right. It depends on you, because if you're having so this is why there's some sympathy to this. If you do the old way of diagnosing diabetes, which is the oral glucose tolerance test, how well can you tolerate glucose after 2 hours? The higher the level, the more likely you are to have type 2 diabetes. But that's a glucose spike. So we can't say glucose spikes are irrelevant, because we used to diagnose diabetes based on the glucose spike. Okay, it's not fully a spike, and some people say, well, that's not a spike, it might be coming down, it might be hovering. Yes, I get it. But if you're insulin, and then the other party will say, well, if you're fully insulin sensitive, so you can actually process carbs appropriately, then it doesn't matter that your glucose is going up. Because it's going to come down fine, and it's going to come down quickly, and it won't be high in that 2 hour range. But then the question is, how high is a spike? What's the cutoff? And having passively absorbed Jessie's stuff over time, just watched it, I never get told this is the cutoff. And I think that would be interesting. If everyone knew, say, for example, it was 7 or 7.5 or 8 or whatever it is, this is the cutoff for spikes. And above it is a spike and below it is not a spike. But then the question is, if that's the cutoff, why is that the cutoff? And just to add in a whole load of human thinking into the mix, at what point do we decide something is pre-diabetes? At what point do we decide something is type 2 diabetes? And at what point do we decide it's bad control? Because ultimately it's just a spectrum, and we've put it into numbers. And at what point does the number become pre-diabetes, and what point is it normal? Because in the USA, the diagnosis for pre-diabetes is different to the diagnosis of pre-diabetes in the UK. And at what point then is it overdiagnosis? So in the USA, if we're using UK figures to give people context on this, my battery's dying on my phone. It says I've got 5% left, and I have no idea why, because it's actually plugged in. I'm just going to double check that it is charging, because I don't want to lose.
Take your time.
Let me just unplug, replug in. Oh, there we go. Just a classic error. It's like you prepare as well as you can, and then The battery's dying, so I'm just going to check this. The battery is actually dying.
This is all staying in, by the way. I like the raw, unedited podcasts.
Amazing. So well,
everyone listening,
we are half charging. Here we go.
Okay.
Are we going? Are we live?
That was a positive sound. Yeah. We think we're good.
Okay. Well, if it dies, we'll have some really poor video quality, and I'll have to get the other charger out, and then it will really be a cut.
It's fine.
And I can't see. I literally can't see from here because I've just had to perch it on something else. Okay. I think it's charging. We're good.
Yeah.
And let me just make sure.
Is it stable? Okay. Is it?
It is stable. It's actually on a proper phone holder, but it's like as if I'm perching it on books or something. It's tilted a little bit, so
yeah.
That's okay. And it's going to go dark in a minute, so all the lighting is going to change. So just throw that into the mix.
Go on, we'll get it done.
So we'll backtrack a little bit on that. So we'll talk about the glucose spikes.
Yes.
And we'll talk about the diagnosis. Okay, so at what point do we diagnose diabetes? Because in the USA, it's a different number. So the context is that 42. So if you just bear with me with these numbers, and there's to make it even worse, there's different units for the USA as there are the UK. So we're just going to use the UK and EU numbers. 42 is pre-diabetes. 48 is type 2 diabetes in the UK. Anything below 42 is technically normal in the UK. And a normal result, so just people get the context, would usually be somewhere between 30 to 40, and most people will be 34 to 36, 33 to 36. So that's the context. Anything below 30 is a bit of a red flag. So it's the 30s, that's normal. In the USA, 39 is pre-diabetes. So if I lived in the USA in 2020, I would have been pre-diabetic because my A1C in 2020, this is the result that the average blood glucose was 41. But in the UK, I was totally normal. Mm-hmm. So then what does pre-diabetes mean? So then some people say, well, actually, it means when you develop insulin resistance. Just to add in more confusion to the mix, a specific number doesn't specifically correlate to insulin resistance for that individual. But if we make an assumption that insulin resistance starts at 39, then the American guideline would perhaps be more accurate. But then the distance between pre-diabetes and type 2 diabetes goes from 39 all the way to 48. So knowing that there's 10 points before that that's normal, added another 10 points that's abnormal. So one would say, okay, that's great because now people know about it. They can do something about it sooner. But actually some people may be 38, 39 and always stay there and not be at any significant high risk of any disease. So then the question is, are we over-medicalizing this thing? Are their insurance premiums changing? Is everything around them changing? Are they worrying literally for no reason? And that is their normal blood glucose. I don't think there's a clear answer on that, but I think I feel more uncomfortable with the American diagnosing than the UK diagnosing, just because it could be bringing so many more people in that aren't at risk. But then you can't just base it on a number. You've got to think about the nuance. Who in your family has type 2 diabetes? When were they diagnosed? Yeah. What does your diet and lifestyle actually look like? And the rest of it. Because ultimately, diabetes is a number. It's a number of your glucose in your bloodstream. That doesn't mean anything about your health on its own. And for medical teams, what we're thinking about is the sick stuff. So we're thinking, how do we prevent you getting heart attacks and strokes and kidney disease and eye disease? So that's actually what we're treating. We're treating the prevention of these conditions. So if we look a little bit downstream, we get to the glucose level, and then we try and treat the glucose level. But actually, we've got to think about all the determinants. So we've got to think about the glucose, the smoking, obviously, most people know that, the alcohol, your weight overall, your body composition, your total fat content. There's all of that, and then the family history. So there's all of that to put into context, because we want to prevent the heart attack, not prevent you having bad diabetes. But obviously that's the consequence of having bad diabetes, the heart attack.
And do most doctors consider all this? Do they know this? How can someone who's worried about this stuff make sure that they're seeing someone that understands all this to the level of you?
Credit to doctors, we know that. We know that that's why we're treating diabetes.
Right.
Perhaps, though, with any industry and with everything that people are doing with their work, you can lose sight of why you're doing something. So you can be totally focused on getting the blood glucose down. And that's actually what's happened within the medical industry. We're totally focused on getting the blood glucose down, that often it might be at the expense of something else or saying that things are okay. So this is a potential issue with medicines. And this is why also the story of these new weight loss injections, why they could be a new panacea for loads of health specific diseases as well, because they're treating at a slightly lower level, earlier level to the root. They're slightly more upstream. So that's why they're having more far-reaching effects. But if we're just focusing on a medicine that helps to get your blood glucose down, which is so often how the industry has been focused because of the way we've thought about diabetes, then it's plugging one gap, but essentially opening other holes and forcing more energy to disease through other ways. A classic example would be if you're eating with your nutrition. So if we only thought nutrition only affected your blood glucose level, then we could treat you with a pill and then that's it, no more risk. So you get your blood glucose down, let's call it you get it to the pre-diabetes range, it's 44, your chance of having major problems related to glucose is low, but your diet's still horrendous. Bowel cancer rates are up, overall cancer rates still up, you're smoking, okay, your other cancer rates are up, your risk of having a heart attack because of your cholesterol is up, inflammation generally in the body, okay, inflammation, another contentious area, but let's just assume, no, let's not assume anything. My view is that we can get chronic inflammation from certain things. So then if the inflammatory processes are up, then the body's not going to be happy and it's going to be in what some people might term an inflamed state. So actually, you've just caused more problems. And then that will present itself. It'll present itself as all those things. Or it might present it as something that we don't see as severe, like gout, for example. People might not have the weak gene or the gene that codes for, or the genes that code for type 2 diabetes expression earlier. But it may bypass that, and then they might end up getting gout because of the way that their lifestyles are. So it's kind of, we've got to think about things holistically. So going back to your original question, which was like, do doctors know about this? Yes, is the short of it. But have we sometimes lost what it means? Yes. But but the question is, what do doctors then don't know, and why are people unhappy then with the medical industry in some parts? And I think people are unhappy because we are trained as medical professionals to give you pills or to cut you open and sew you back up. That's our expertise. Because that's how we viewed medicine for so long. And obviously institutions that are large, that have degrees that last between 5 and 6 years and plus another 5 years of training, there's a time lag. There's going to be a time lag because of the years it takes to train people and then to train the people that are training the people who are being trained by the medical industry back from 10 years ago. So there's even the training sort of like, there's this whole time lag with training. Doctors then know that it's about dieting, exercise and nutrition, exercise lifestyle, environment, public health. We know about public health. Doctors specialize in public health. But I believe there is a cultural issue that unless it's medicines or surgery, then is it really the doctor's position to be treating you? And I think the doctors think that, but I think society also thinks that to an extent as well. But then doctors get the rap because they're meant to know what to do to treat you because it's a disease, but they've only got pills and surgery in their armor, and they also think that it's not their issue to then deal with it. So then then quite rightly so, you'll be referred to a dietitian or a nutritionist as well. But the doctors don't know about any of that stuff. And it's so often in hospital care, doctors don't necessarily do everything, but they will be the knowledge overseer and often coordinating the treatment and support. That is still not there. And I think a big gap is missing. We don't have the expertise that bridges the medical support with the nutritional support. And I think that's what people are asking for. They don't want to be told that that they shouldn't be taking medicines and they don't work. And they also don't want to be told that just eat a healthy diet, because people just walk out the GP surgery and like, yeah, I am already eating a healthy diet. What does it even mean?
Mm.
There needs to be an overseer. And I really genuinely believe there's not one person for this kind of condition. It does require different people. You go to your PT and you might get nutritional support from your PT, but if you're only looking for nutritional support, you wouldn't go to a PT, personal trainer. You'd go to the nutritionist or the dietitian. And if you're only looking for exercise support, you wouldn't go to the nutritionist. You would go to the personal trainer.
Mm.
But then who do you go to talk to you about your diabetes and your medicines and your nutrition and your exercise and the sleep and the stress and the environment and how you feel in between? That's the issue. And there aren't many people like us, but if I was to say who do you go to, it would be a lifestyle medicine physician. So someone who specializes in this term called lifestyle medicine, which sounds like we're all just sitting on our backsides and enjoying ourselves. That's the type of medicine that we're doing. But it's not. It's actually looking and treating disease. And I think that's a really core term. People don't like it. We are treating disease with your life and your lifestyles.
Mm.
Otherwise, we dumb it down and we say, actually, no, we're only treating with medicines, or you can do this lifestyle support. I genuinely believe it's treatment, especially if we're bringing people from disease to not disease.
Yeah. And a big focus on prevention, isn't there? Like focusing on those 5 things: movement, nutrition, sleep, stress, all that connection, all that good stuff. This is why we need that.
And then the question is, when do you start? Like, do you start when you're sick, or do you start earlier? And is it going to be a payoff if you start earlier? Should you invest? It's like sort of like buying insurance. Should I invest in all of this? Will I be the 1 in 3 that gets diabetes or any other health condition? But the nice thing is that the things that you do to prevent diabetes are the things that you do to prevent cancer. They're the things that you do to prevent osteoporosis. Yeah. And they're the things that you do to prevent dementia. So that's the great thing. If you do all this, you're protecting all of the things.
Yeah. And so surely you should just be investing, and we should be teaching this in schools, and it should be wider known, which it does feel
Absolutely.
like there's been a turnaround and more talk, people understand so much more.
Is it being taught in schools?
It's been taught maybe not very well, and maybe with not the best examples. And maybe, you talk about like the 5-year, 10-year lag in medical training. I feel like in primary school, they're still teaching science lessons about nutrition, and they're basing it on like the old food pyramid, and they're still saying like you need this amount of meat, and you need to, the only place to get dairy is, the only place to get calcium is dairy, and things like that. So some outdated things.
Well, we are absolutely due nutrition guidance updates, and I think it may happen very soon in the UK, because there's usually I think it's like a 10 or 20 year cycle. I think it might be a 20-year cycle. Absolutely due. I've done a review of all nutrition guidelines across the world.
But there are some amazing ones that have come out recently, haven't there? Like Canada and Norway or Denmark.
Canada, I can't remember the Germany, I'm pretty sure. Belgium and Denmark, or one of the other Nordics.
Yeah.
I feel like it's Sweden popping out at me, or Finland.
And it's just that pre-60s Greek Mediterranean, isn't it? It's kind of similar to that.
It's basically, it's their Nordic version of the pre-1960s Mediterranean diet.
I think is it the Danish or the Norwegian one that's like, drink water. It's just so simple. Thirsty, drink water, I'm pretty sure it says.
It's so obvious. I was trying not to say it, but I was like, it's so bloody obvious. It is so clear that the best liquid that you can give yourself is water.
Yeah, but we're now like just pop and fizzy drinks and all that is just so normal. It's like, I'll have one of those a day. It's like, I think
to give people hope, once it's out, you don't miss it. Once you reset the palate, once you change the environment, you don't even see it. You don't miss it.
You just have to get over that.
You don't go to another country and have an acute withdrawal because you didn't get your Greggs sausage roll, do you? So you might come back to the UK after a 3-week holiday and think, oh yeah, that'd be nice. But you're not like sat there on the beach and like, oh, I wish I just had that Greggs right now. No, that never happens.
I think my mum would be like that. My mum's obsessed with Greggs. She loves Greggs. I'm sure.
Maybe, for some people. I can't stereotype everyone into that category. Yes, of course, some people, they will be thinking about the sausage roll on the beach. But I think most people won't be.
What about we've talked a little. You've mentioned a couple of times about weight and weight loss. Where does this factor into the conversation, and where does BMI and being, for whatever person, their diagnosis, what word I would use for being overweight for whatever that person is, and the fact that we've this measurement BMI was introduced, and that's one way that people, doctors and healthcare professionals can talk to people about their weight. That's maybe in a bit of a softer approach, but then I see backlash against that. I don't know. I see all these different conversations going on around health and weight, and I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on where this all comes together.
There's a significant percentage of type 2 diabetes that's associated with weight. Or, to better put it now, fat. But that's not to stigmatize the word fat. So this is the issue. So we've got a problem, but we don't have an answer. The problem is BMI doesn't work properly. But what's the answer? Especially when it comes to linguistics and the language of talking about weight. Because this is my personal view. If we talk about weight, it feels nicer and more appropriate than talking about fat. But fat is the problem with the weight. It's not the weight itself. So when we think about the BMI, we think about the height-weight ratio, but it doesn't tell us where the weight is being held in the body. And if it is being held more in the middle, then that weight is more likely to be fat. And that fat is more likely to be around your organs and inside your organs and stopping your organs working effectively. Essentially, think about the intestines as your roads and highways to the factories. And then you can think about the rest of your tummy, the liver, pancreas, all of that as the factory itself. And if it's covered in soot, or it's not cleaned out properly, or it's not able to get through and things aren't able to travel easily, then of course it's not going to work so efficiently. And that's essentially what's happening when you're infiltrating more fat into the system. So there's the medical way of viewing it, but then there's also the societal view of what it means to be fat, as the term fat instead of using weight. And I specifically say here, I'm liberally using these terms without meaning to cause offense. It's just talking about the subject, really. So, question around BMI. Should we use it? So Dr. Leah Jacob, this doctor who we mentioned before off the podcast, who's a hematologist, clinical nutritionist, and health coach, she has coined the term, should we bin the BMI? Or she says we need to bin the BMI. My position, and I totally get the position of that, my position is that there is still use in the BMI because we don't have a better alternative yet that the public will easily understand, that is universally used across the UK. So I do think BMI should be phased out, probably. It could be a BMI plus kind of model. So it could be BMI plus more information. That could be one way around it. Or another way is that we phase in a new model and that over the next decade, then BMI gets phased out. But it's going to take some time. So the issue is this: BMI doesn't tell you where your fat is, and it doesn't tell you about your body composition between muscle and fat. And really, if we were to flip it and say, it's not about the fat and it's not about the weight, then what is it? And say, well, what is the positives of this? It's about your muscle. So if we were to maximize your muscle compared to your weight or compared to your fat, then we're changing things. Mm-hmm. A less accurate way would be muscle to weight, but it's more softer in a way from a language perspective. But a more accurate way would be to compare your muscle to your fat ratio. When you have more muscle compared to fat, then metabolically speaking, you're going to be working better because it's your muscle that are using. If we think back to caveman times, prehistoric age, we assume that we had no brains then, but we did absolutely have brains, the same brains as we have now. But let's go back to then. You have food, it comes in, we need to reproduce. We have food, it comes in, it needs to be processed. And then as part of that, what do we do with the food that's been processed? Yes, okay, we do lots of important body processes. What do we do with the excess of it? We turn it to muscle. What does muscle do? It allows us to move, allows us to procreate, allows us to continue the cycle. So the end point is muscle. At the moment in our society, it's not the only endpoint, it's a big endpoint. At the moment in society, one of the big endpoints that we're missing is muscle. So in a way, we could change the story from fat and weight and switch it to muscle, which is great for the bodybuilders out there.
Yeah.
And that's why athletes who have high BMIs are not sick, and why society doesn't see them as unwell or sick, and they don't get diabetes.
I remember my sister being told that she's overweight because her BMI was, whatever it was, 20 something, because she's a short, stocky, she's a feisty little thing, my sister. And, she had a high BMI because of her height. But at the time, she was fit and training and stuff like that. And, being told you're overweight, it's just madness. But that focus on muscle, I like that. And I haven't heard that before. I mean, obviously I've heard, or we've seen, it seems like there's been a big mindset shift of people, and maybe more so females in the gym, no, I don't want to be skinny, I want to be strong, totally. I want to build muscle. And it seems like a much more healthy approach to life. And if we're focusing on that, so we've got a positive outlook. It's it's the same with diet. Rather than focus on what we don't want to eat, let's focus more on what we do want to eat. Think about all the things you want to fill your plate with, not, I need to cut out this, I need to cut out this. It seems like a much more sustainable and positive approach if you focus on the positives. That's really cool.
It is, but even in a way, muscle itself isn't going to be the full story.
Right.
So again, if we oversimplify it that way, that probably won't tell us everything. I probably have to sit down and really do some thinking about it.
Well, bodybuilders aren't actually the most healthy people, are they? I'm pretty sure they die in their 50s.
Well,
and 40s.
Their cardio fitness may not be so good as well. And then there's this perfect ratio of cardio to resistance exercise and the rest of it. Yeah. And I'm certainly not hitting the perfect ratio. But just to kind of sign off on this BMI debate, it still has some use, right? Because if we were to say that, are you exercising to a point where you feel like an athlete, or you are an athlete, or are you exercising and hitting the government guidelines? We could just simplify that for people. Are you doing 150 minutes of moderate activity, so that's something that makes you sweat, makes you move, or are you doing 75 minutes of very vigorous activity, so that's really pushing yourself hard per week? So an hour 15 or an hour or 2.5 hours of moderate activity. And is your BMI above 25, which is the overweight category? If you're that, then your BMI is much less likely to indicate that you're unhealthy. And I think that's a good way to look at it. If you're not hitting that and your BMI is above 25, and certainly if it's above 30, then the chances are that it's more likely to infer potential risk, because you're not turning the energy that's coming in into an output of muscle or utilizing that energy appropriately. So I think that's another way to think about it. And then we haven't even talked about waist hip ratio, which I don't use. It's very useful, or waist height ratio. I don't use them just because they're very abstract for people. So I like to make things understandable. It's better to know what your waist is and what your trouser size is, or your dress size is, and then work from there. I think that's a very sensible thing, and people often know if they're carrying extra weight in their midriff. If it's hanging over your belt, if you're not sitting down and it's hanging over your belt, then it might be a risk, because then there might be more fat internally as well. Very simple, but I think we need to provide, and it's the other thing, is we need to provide simple messages. We need to take the complicated stuff, embrace that it's complex, but then turn it into simplified messages. And that's what Jessie and Chalsby's done, actually. When you look at why she got 5 million followers, why has she been so successful? She's taken something that's highly complicated. She's obviously highly trained. She's a biochemist. Yes, she might not have a degree in clinical nutrition, so she may not know necessarily, especially when she started, the full context of some of the stuff. But she's totally simplified glucose spikes into beautiful diagrams. And people get it, and people understand it, and people want simple messages. Unfortunately, simple messages loses nuance, and you can lose some of the science. And you can sort of get piggybacking and proxy benefits by doing other things.
Yeah.
But if you simplify the message, people are going to follow it. So,
and then if
many people can criticize, but it's actually helping a lot of people. That's the thing.
Right.
And I think people, the unfortunate thing is the true scientific community who would not present things like this would be saying, yeah, but what about the risk? What about the problems that are being created? But the unfortunate thing for the scientific community is that they would have to do the studies to prove themselves right, because that's the only way that they could prove it. They can't take the approach of beautiful diagrams to prove why Jesse's not doing it, because otherwise they'd be playing into pseudoscience as well. So they have to follow the book, and the book is going to take years to prove what they're saying is true. But by that point, 5 million people have gone on and signed on to her Instagram page.
Well, there's some little, I can't remember what it is, little quote about that, about like the amount of effort it takes to create, you know, I don't know, just to fabricate something versus the amount of effort it takes to disprove it is just, you know, tenfold or whatever, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think in this case, it's not necessarily that she's, and I know you're not saying this, but I know it's not that she's necessarily fabricating it, but it's like the energy to create anything is this much, but the energy to disprove or go deeper and find the evidence is this much.
Yeah.
And people want to do that and people want to find it, but it's a balance of probabilities as well. People are going to hate me for saying this, but I've just got to say what I think, which is that if 95% of people, and I'm not saying that this is the number, but I'm just saying as a hypothetical, if 95% of people have a benefit and 10% of people get worse, is it safe or is it not safe? I'm not going to answer that because I don't think there's an answer. But I think that's often what people are trying to balance up here. Is it worth the do no harm side to do the benefit of 95 people?
Dr. Ids.
As medics, we're taught to do no harm first, and I think that's the thing.
Yeah. Do you know Dr. Ids?
Dr. Ids. Okay, let's go.
No, I'm not saying we're going to spend long here, but it's just funny that you brought up the glucose goddess, because he did a video just today that was like a bit of a takedown of her.
He's done a few.
Yeah, because she'd presented like, she was talking about Huel, which I thought, you know, well, you're not going back on Stephen Bartlett's podcast if you're ripping into Huel, but she showed a graph.
I think she will, because she'd already ripped into Huel before she went on.
Oh, really? Actually. I mean, it just seems to be a whole big cycle of grifters on grifters podcasts. But anyway.
The thing that Dr. Ids has got going for him, and you probably won't watch this, but if you did, Dr. Ids, if you do watch this, I'm bloody terrified of you. So even if I was to challenge you, I'm so scared about the re-challenge that, like, right now I probably don't have the confidence to go there.
but you would. There's some things that you're not happy, you don't think. I just look at him and go, okay. But I guess that's the danger, isn't it? Like, we're all just picking sides here. Like, there's no reason to think.
I'll tell you a story about. I'll tell you about a little story about Dr. Ids.
On camera or off camera?
On camera. I feel like I'm going to be picked on now. So, Dr. Ids, if you're watching, I don't disagree with stuff that you're saying, but I just got a story, which is that I was watching Dr. Ids for a while. And then I saw him at the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine conference in September in 2024 in Newcastle. And I was chatting to him. And I was like, oh, wait, where are you from? And I can't remember who asked it first. And he said, oh, he's from Solihull in Birmingham. I was like, oh, really? I'm from Solihull. That's where I grew up. And he goes, yeah. I said, what school did you go to? And he said, oh, King Edward's. And I said, so did I. I was like, how old are you? And he goes, oh, he's like in his 20s and I'm in my 30s. So I knew we weren't the same age. I said, what's your surname? He goes, Mughal. And I was like, oh, you're Lily Idris, aren't you? I used to see you on the bus and you're like this high. Because me and his brother were really good friends.
No way.
And he was the little one. He was the youngest of his brothers. I used to see him all the time. He used to go around and he's like this high. And now he's like Dr. Ids on Instagram. It's actually quite funny, isn't it?
That is really funny.
So that's my story about Dr. Ids. But Ids, if you're watching, let's have some more conversations offline. I'm too scared to challenge you online.
I definitely wouldn't be able to keep up with him either. Cool. So we've talked a little about BMI and the limitations and some suggestions of how we could develop it to something else. But one of the other things I wanted to ask about is just weight in general and the the health versus not healthy of being overweight, and the like having delicate conversations with people, but also are people, what would you say to someone that's saying we're in this situation we're in now because we've been so afraid of just saying to people, look, you're overweight and you need to sort this out. But instead we've kind of had too much of a soft approach, maybe like, yeah, it's okay. And there's a whole body positivity movement that maybe plays into this as well. Like, yeah, I guess you know what I'm getting at.
Out there there are also doctors out there who are saying that we shouldn't force people to talk about their weight, or we shouldn't even be bringing it up. It's up to them to bring it up. I think there's a degree of autonomy, so independence, that people should have with their own health and decisions. But that's got to be balanced with allowing people and giving them the chance to have access to all the information that's out there as well. Because if people are making decisions based on their amount of information, that's different to making a decision based on disinformation. So it's the information that you have access to and your thinking around it that's going to impact the decisions people make. So I'm just trying to put myself in the clinic. And I'm going to use scientific terminology to remove any emotion from it. And someone has a BMI of over 25, so highly scientific here. I'm totally objectifying you right now. BMI over 25, let's call it, BMI over 25 comes and sits down, and there's a diabetes issue, and weight might potentially be a factor because they're carrying more fat around the middle, and I've visually seen it, but I haven't examined her or talked about it, him or her. That's the scenario. That's difficult, but I think the start is to find out what their thoughts and beliefs are. So if I was thinking about this from a perfect perspective, and I hope this comes out perfect because I said perfect perspective, is that first of all, I'd like to find out what they feel about their condition. So what do you feel about your diabetes? And how do you feel about the treatment that you're getting? Have you tried anything to try and improve it? Do you think that there's anything that's driving your diabetes? Then what I'm doing is I'm creating a better understanding of their viewpoint and their perspective and their position. And then it can allow me to enter in. So if they say, I'm trying to do something about my weight because I really think that's affecting my diabetes, then a way in would be, would you like to talk about that with me? Or they might say, well, Doc, I literally have no idea why this is happening. I'm totally fit and healthy. I'm eating well. Can I talk? And so there's different ways, and then you would just try and enter. Sometimes you can't enter. Other times you can. I have to say, I can't think of a time where I've offended anyone. I can think of one person who has been a little bit touchy about the subject in the last 5 years. But maybe there's another one or two. But for the most part, I haven't offended anyone. And it's kind of part of the conversation. But I think people should be allowed to talk about things. I think we can go sometimes too far the other side and say, no, we can't talk about anything. And I think there's a danger there. If you can't talk about anything, then you can't communicate potentially risks and other things that's going on in people's lives.
But what would you say to that patient that's like, I'm perfectly healthy, I eat really well, but actually they've got a BMI of 25 and you can see they're carrying a lot of excess weight?
Now you're going there.
Yeah, I am going there. I'm not letting you off the hook.
So again, perfect responses. So you might say, if you're not sure, perhaps I could talk to you about some of the risk factors that are related to having worse health with your diabetes or having a higher blood glucose. How does that sound? And if they're yes, then it can be very neutral, because you can say, well, some of these factors are the things that you're eating, the excess fat around organs. So again, what I'm doing is I'm removing any emotion. I'm just talking scientifically about it. So then if I do that, then there's less of the emotive context about it. But usually people want to talk about it and open up. But I think there's a way there to utilize scientific terminology and objectify things in a way so that people don't feel something. We can just objectively think about it to begin with. And I think that's an okay approach to take, actually.
Yeah. No, I think your approach of, and I just hadn't thought about it like that, that there's just the fact that you guide them, like just the fact that you kind of prodded a little and said, what do you think? And that's the secret, isn't it?
That's the coaching technique.
Yeah, exactly. It's coaching, isn't it? Yeah. And how many different aspects would that work with? Well, what do you think? What do you think this is the problem here? And stuff like that.
It's bringing people with your communication journey so it doesn't just feel so abrupt.
Yeah.
I do remember, I won't say his name, but I do remember his name, a GP. And I only trained with him for a few days, a week or two, actually, at university. I went into the GP surgery. I was on placement with the GP. I laugh about it now. And this man came in and he was quite overweight and it was very much central. So skinny everywhere else and just sort of very central. The weight was here. And he'd come in with a heart issue. And or it was a neck issue. I can't really remember, but he was behind the patient. The patient was sat on the chair and he'd felt his neck or had listened to his chest or something. And then just leant over, tapped him on the tummy and went, "When's it due?" I was like, you can't say that. And the worst bit was that there was just deadpan silence. I was a nervous medical student and the patient was just like, and just didn't say anything. I was just like, yeah, that one went down really bad. So if you're a GP and you're a doctor, maybe don't do that.
No.
That is offensive.
Lesson number one.
But I do think about it and I do laugh about it now because, God, the awkwardness was incredible.
Oh, man. Wow.
So Dr. M, if you're listening, I won't say your full name. I still remember that from 2004. 2006, that was, yeah.
Right. Well, I've, asked maybe a couple of uncomfortable questions. Maybe we can go to some more comfortable questions to start to round off the episode. Yeah. But yeah, I'm really happy to have got you on the podcast finally. We've known each other for a good couple of years now, haven't we? So I'm really glad to have someone with your passion and expertise in this subject. It's been really cool, and I feel like if you're up for it to come back on again and talk about all these other kind of metabolic health issues and all stuff that we didn't get to talk about that I'd love to talk to you about. Would be. I feel
like there was a bunch of questions that we didn't even get to.
I know, but I'm thinking if we're approaching kind of an hour and 15, it's
yeah, of course we've got to stop at some point.
It's the way it is, but that's fine. But I don't want you to go before you've told us about Mahi Health and some of the other projects and also how people can connect with you and find out more about what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So Mahi Health is a health coaching service. What we do is we help people to put diseases into remission, like type 2 diabetes and other metabolic health conditions. So that includes things like blood pressure, cholesterol, and fatty liver disease. We work with all of those together and try and prevent and reverse them. So essentially getting you back to a healthier state so you don't have to be on medicines, you don't have to think about surgery, you don't have to go through the discomfort of hospital appointments, and then you can avoid the potential risks of illnesses. So we do that through that multidisciplinary approach that I sort of told you about. So we have PTs, nutritionists, dietitians, myself as lifestyle medicine physician, and we pick and choose the right program for each person, and it changes throughout the program because needs change as more information comes to light. So that's how we do it. So we take people through 6-month programs, and I think of it as transformative in the way that we do it, because it should be a lifelong outcome in terms of what people have afterwards. Yes, that's Mahi Health, mahi.health, if anyone wants to look it up. And the best way to message me and get in contact with me is on Instagram, if you're looking for health-related information. And if you want to hear about my musings and criticisms and things about life, then go to LinkedIn. So yeah, Instagram and LinkedIn, Kiran Sodha for both, or Dr. Sodha, you'll find me on
You'd
those.
Normally think it would be the other way around. Like I thought LinkedIn was supposed to be very professional, and Instagram we can say what we want over there.
I do the other way around. I think there's a different audience. The Instagram audience is very much type 2 diabetes and diabetes, and the LinkedIn audience is a professional audience, but it's my heart on my sleeve audience too.
Love it.
Yeah.
Right. I finish every episode with 3 questions. If you're up for these, they're more quick fire. You can have them as short as you like. Your answers can be as short as you like if you're ready. So the first one is, what's one lesson you wish you'd have been taught as a child?
I thought about this for 20, 30 minutes, maybe longer, and I just couldn't think of one lesson. So I thought about time. I'll say time. Okay, this is a lesson, and it's for children at school, and it's for people coming towards in secondary education. You probably won't know what you want to do with the rest of your life. And if you don't know, sometimes the best thing to do is just study a bit more. And I genuinely think the more studying and more education you do in your 20s, the better life becomes in your 30s. And take more risks, study more, do more of the things that you love, so that when you get to your 30s, you kind of potentially have more clarity. That's my thinking.
Nice. Next one. What's one habit that you've added to your life, or a habit that you've got rid of that's helping you feel happier and healthier?
The habit that's helping me the most is nutrition. So it's just automatic. Like the automatic go-to is healthy, and unhealthy feels awful. And I can enjoy it, but it's never my baseline. So that's something that somehow just changed in me in the last 5 years, which even surprises me. And the one thing that I brought in, which I don't like, which you need to get rid of, is the sleep. So I'd add that in there. It's really gone to pot. That's probably because I'm recovering and I'm at home from surgery recently. So that's probably affected my sleep cycle. So having a nice routine is super important. So I'm looking forward to getting back into a good routine.
And the last one, if you could give everyone in the world one book, which book would you give them?
I'm going to give you two because I just can't give one. So The Source by Tara Swart, Source. There are many incredible books out there. This is the one I think that can have the most impact on people. It brings the science to the magic of manifestation. So that's why I think that's important. And the second book, just because it was so beautifully and eloquently written, is by Paul Kalanithi, called When Breath Becomes Air. He was a NYT, New York Times journalist turned neurosurgeon, and then got a neurosurgical cancer. And then he wrote about his entire experience, and it is just beautiful.
Oh, wow.
And I won't ruin the ending, but I guarantee you'll cry.
Okay. Oh, I'll have to check that one out. Nice.
Yeah.
Well, Kiran, thank you again for your time. Really appreciate you coming on. Really grateful to have maintained this connection over the last couple of years. And yeah, looking forward to having you on again.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in. I really hope you found my conversation with Kiran insightful. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with friends, family, and colleagues who you think would find it helpful too. You can also support the podcast by following and rating the show on whichever app you're listening on. Thank you again, and I look forward to bringing you another episode soon.